I'm Rob. I'm the youth pastor here at St. Nick's, and it's really, really great. And I'm really excited to introduce Betty. So, Betty, thank you so much for joining us today. Betty is training to be a lawyer with us in Bristol. So, Betty, over to you. Please, can you tell us a little bit about lockdown, how you've been finding it? Have you got any amazing tips that you'd recommend?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm Betty. Yeah, second year university. Trying to do studying from home over the past few months in lockdown. Yeah, any lockdown tips? I don't know. I think a walk a day is my tip that I would give to people. I have my family here, and we try and go on a walk a day as a family to try and just get out the house. I feel like it can be quite stuffy. So that's my lockdown tip. And yeah, I'm in Devon currently. So yeah.
Sweet, big time.
Yeah.
That's great. I do love a walk. I mean, the freedom is just amazing, especially when it's nice weather. Amazing.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So good.
so Betty, can you just tell us a little bit about, your background? You mentioned Devon, so a little bit about where you're from, background, and maybe
Mhm.
actually how you found life growing up as a young person.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm from Exeter or near Exeter in a small little village. And I grew up in Zimbabwe. And I moved here to Devon when I was 11 years old.
Mm.
I growing up, I went to a primary school where I was pretty much me and my sister were the only black students there, and we were the first ones in my school as far as I'm aware. So I went there for a few months, and then I moved up to secondary school, where I was maybe one of five in a school of 1,500. So yeah, I think growing up, I'd never realized I was different, or I'd never been hit with, yeah, that difference until I moved here. And I was like, wow, I don't look like the other kids. I don't have hair like the other kids. So I think, yeah, growing up as a teenager, I was always very, I was just discovering who I was as someone who's a black young person, and I'd never really been confronted with that before growing up in a country where I was part of the majority.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of my background and my upbringing and growing up here. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. And
Mm,
how did it make you feel all about George Floyd and what's happening at the moment?
mm. Yeah, I think when I found out about George Floyd, I'd been on a walk with my family the day before. We'd gone on a walk by the river. As I said, we go on a walk a day. And we bumped across a group of these guys.
Mm.
Must have been about 16, 17. And they were on the other side of the river, and they shouted the N-word at us when we were walking, but we couldn't do anything because they were on the other side. We couldn't swim across, and so I think we were just like, it's okay. So we started walking back home. So I think I was already feeling um, very tender, very fragile from that. And I woke up the next morning and I saw this video. I couldn't watch it fully. I couldn't personally because I think it's so real. Because when I see things like this, I just don't see another black man. I have a brother. I see my brother. I see my dad.
Mm.
Um, so I think it hit me so hard that I'm an internal processor, so I couldn't really. I remember I was just kind of like caught up in this moment. I couldn't. At first, I couldn't really share with anybody. I just kind of shut myself off for a little bit. Um, Even for my family, everyone was trying to be quite vocal, but I think it's just something that, yeah, it's shocking because we were never created to see black or white any man die. And I think for that video we're just so confronted with it, just cruelty. um so yeah, I was yeah, quite shocked, very angry, a lot of feelings that started rising up, a lot of anger, frustration. How can this happen again? We've had Ahmaud Arbery before, and it was Breonna Taylor in the space of months.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it's just looking, and these are all people who look like me. So it's just, yeah, it was just very, very hard hitting, and it still is. So yeah, that's kind of that was my thought process through it all.
And obviously you said you're studying as a lawyer. That's really cool. So obviously a big thing around being a lawyer is justice. And justice is really important, it's significant, and justice is something we need to see and experience in this world. So what does justice look like in this current situation?
Yeah, I think, yeah, for me, I'm very driven by justice, which is, I guess, what led me to pursue a career in law. But I think for me, I can often think justice looks very different to each person. My version of justice without Jesus looks very different, I guess, to yours, because we're all kind of messed up, really, aren't we? We don't really know left and right without Jesus. So I think I've just really had to lean into what is God's justice. It says, the Bible tells us that the foundations of his throne are righteousness and justice. And I think, yeah, I tried for a long time to see this whole situation through my own lens of justice. And I think it's a slippery slope, because you get bitter, you get angry at God, why are you not doing anything? Why haven't you ended racism already? It's not something new, racism. I think the current events have just brought out a lot of things up to the surface, but it's not new. So yeah, I was reading the story of the Israelites in Exodus. And they were enslaved for 400 years. They were in slavery. And throughout the book, God repeats this line, I've heard the cries of my people, and I will deliver them. I am concerned about them. And I think that's we're going to live to see a day where every wrong is made right, and God brings justice unto the earth. But I think I just take comfort right now in knowing that God hears the cries of his people. He's not a God who just sits in heaven and listens and watches. He's not passive, but he is so, racism breaks the very heart of God. And I think I've just, trying to wrap my head around that and just try and see God, because I think it's very easy for me to become bitter in the chase of my own justice, especially as it keeps happening over and over again, and there's only so much someone can see of this. So yeah, it's just trying to see what's God's justice. That's what I'm trying to pursue personally. So yeah, that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What can we do to be hopeful, to see a change? How can we have hope throughout this season?
Yeah, I think my prayer is that I would never want more young people, more youth. If I have children one day, I would never want them to experience some of the things that I have with racism, or that my parents have. Because when my parents were growing up, we grew up in Zimbabwe, and it was during the time of a war of independence. So they grew up in a country that was their own, but they weren't allowed to do certain things in certain places. Obviously, we've seen such a change, but it's as events like this show you, and things like this show you, that there's so much still. So my hope is that we start to move towards a future where I think we see young people right now. I think there's such a staring, especially in young people, to stand up for this injustice. So yeah, I'm really encouraged by that. And I love the full picture we get in Revelation. Revelation 7 verse 9, it's every nation, every tribe, every tongue kneeling down before Jesus. There won't be a black people over there. There won't be segregation. There won't be an Asian people over there, but actually we'll all stand as one, because we're all children of God. So I think, my hope for the future is that we would start to pray prayers, Lord, bring heaven on earth. Let earth start to reflect heaven in its diversity, in the way that we love one another. Heaven is not a place of one race, but it's a place that we're going to meet tribes and people that groups we've never heard of before, and that's so exciting. So we don't, but that doesn't mean we have to wait. I think, I don't know, as Christians, we can be a bit passive in these situations, but I feel God is really calling the church to be proactive in seeking diversity, whether that's in our church at St. Nick's or seeking diversity in our friendship groups, and just praying that prayer, Lord, let the earth start to reflect heaven's diversity. So that's my hope for the future and what I'm really praying into myself.
That's great, Betty. Thank you so much. Just one more question. Young people today obviously face so many challenges. So actually, what one bit of advice would you give to young people? So, for example, if I said, what one bit of advice do you wish you knew then that would have helped you today? What advice would you give to them today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I would say, for any young person who feels different or who feels isolated in whatever situation they find themselves in, I think embrace that. I think for a long time, personally, I spent a lot of time running away from my identity and who I was, and whether that's because people have spoken words and spoken things. For me, it was racism and things that made me feel uncomfortable in my own skin. For another young person, it might be different. I think for whatever has been spoken over you or said, I think just embrace who you are, because at the end of the day, I found that is that which is so precious and so unique, and that's who you were created to be. My advice would be start being yourself. Start being yourself. There's never a better time than now. That would be my advice to my younger self. I would have told myself to just own you, Betty, own you.
Yeah.
Because I didn't do that very well.
What two things in particular would you say that I can pray for you now, but actually we can continue praying over time for what's happening around the world?
I think, for around the world, I think especially pray that the church will be at the forefront of being bringers of justice, because we know who justice is. It's God. And I think in a world right now, we've seen so much violence and so many people and so many voices rising up. But I'm just so challenged that the voice of the church is so crucial. The voice of the church is so important at this time. I would say pray that the church would rise up and proclaim the name of Jesus as the bringer of justice. Pray for a church that's not passive, that just watches, but a church that is proactive. Pray for people who maybe racism has suppressed and has just that bitterness has started to build. I just feel like we should really pray into that hearts will begin to be released, that have maybe there's a heart of stone has started to build up. Just pray that God can soften hearts, especially at this time, because I'm aware that it's not easy. This conversation it's not easy, and for a lot of people who look like myself, it's not an easy time, especially because bitterness can really start to grow, and I've seen it in myself. Pray for Black people, pray for people of color, that God will continue to protect hearts. That would be my prayer.
Betty, thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it, and we'll see you later.
Thank you for having me.
That's absolutely no worries. Take care. See you in a bit.
Bye.